They took my room for storage. My brother still has his childhood setup. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I am 22 years old. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that my parents had turned my childhood bedroom into a storage room, while my brother Jake, who is 19, still maintains his room exactly as it was when he was 12 years old. This is the story of how I learned that, for my family, my place at home was never really mine. I grew up in a 2-story colonial house in Westfield, Massachusetts, a small town about an hour from Boston. Our house was on Elm Street, a tree-lined road where homes had wide front porches and well-maintained gardens. Ours was light blue with white trim, built in 1952, with those hardwood floors that creaked in specific places I knew by heart. My room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the hallway, with 2 windows overlooking the backyard. It was a medium-sized room with walls painted lavender that I had chosen when I was 13, a light wood desk where I did all my high school homework, and a twin bed with a floral comforter my grandmother had made for me. On the walls were photos of me with school friends, academic merit certificates, and a corkboard full of memories from my 4 years of high school. Jake lived in the room next to mine, a slightly larger space that our parents had decorated when he was 8 with gaming-themed wallpaper. The walls still had video game characters, shelves full of action figures he had been collecting since childhood, and a complete gaming setup with 2 monitors, a black leather chair, and blue LED lights that flashed throughout the night. Even at 19, while attending his sophomore year at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Jake kept his room exactly like a shrine to his childhood. When I graduated from Boston University last year with a degree in communications, I came home with the intention of staying only a few months. The economy was tough, marketing jobs were scarce, and my parents offered for me to stay home until I could get financially established. It seemed like a sensible plan. Save rent money, help with household expenses, and use the time to find a job I actually wanted. But when I arrived home after graduation, I discovered that my room had been converted into what my mother called a flexible office. My bed had been replaced with an uncomfortable sofa bed. My desk had been moved to the basement, and the space was filled with my mother's work equipment, files, and an industrial printer that ran constantly. "You will stay in the guest room for now," said my mother, Elena Martinez, when I protested about the changes. "It is just until you get your own apartment. The guest room will be perfect for you." The guest room was on the 1st floor, near the living room, and was significantly smaller than my original room. It had a double bed, a small dresser, and a window that faced the garage driveway. There was no space for my books, my personal belongings, or any sense of privacy. But my mother insisted it would be temporary. Elena worked as a human resources consultant for companies in the Boston area, a business that had grown considerably during the pandemic, when many companies needed to restructure their remote work policies. She was a 48-year-old woman, organized and ambitious, who had turned her former hobby of professional counseling into a profitable business. My father, David Martinez, worked as a civil engineer for the state of Massachusetts and always supported his wife's professional ambitions. During the first few months at home, I tried to adapt to the temporary arrangement. I looked for jobs in the Boston area, had some interviews, and helped with household chores to justify my presence. But as the months passed, I realized that the temporary arrangement was becoming permanent, and that my status in the house had fundamentally changed. Jake would come home from university on weekends and during holidays, always to his untouched room. His game posters were still perfectly positioned, his card and toy collections organized exactly as he had left them. My mother would wash his clothes, change his sheets, and keep everything clean and organized for his visits. Meanwhile, I was living in the guest room, paying $300 a month to my parents to help with expenses, and slowly watching my personal belongings being moved to boxes in the basement to make room for more of my mother's work equipment. The situation became even more obvious during Thanksgiving last year. Jake brought his girlfriend Emma to meet the family, and my mother made a point of showing her his room. "See how we keep everything exactly as Jake likes it," Elena said, opening his room door with pride. "He always has a special place here at home." Emma admired the gaming setup, the collectible posters, and the careful organization of all of Jake's belongings. "It is incredible how you preserved everything," she commented. "It must be very special for him to know he can always come home and find everything as he left it." Later that day, when Emma asked about my room, there was an uncomfortable silence. "Well, Sarah is using the guest room now," my mother explained quickly. It is more practical for her while she is looking for an apartment. Emma seemed confused. But where were her things when she was younger? We stored everything in the basement, said my father, to make room for Elena's office. It was at that moment that I truly understood the difference between how my family saw my place at home compared to Jake's place. He had a preserved shrine, a sacred space that no one dared to alter. I had boxes in the basement and a guest room that I paid to use. 3 weeks ago, the situation reached a breaking point when I discovered that my parents were planning to convert the guest room where I lived into a permanent storage space for my mother's company. I was working on my laptop at the kitchen table, sending resumes to marketing agency jobs in Boston, when I heard my mother talking on the phone about renovations. "Yes, we are going to install floor-to-ceiling shelves," she was saying. "The space will be perfect for files and equipment. We will finally have adequate organization for all client documents." When she hung up, I asked what she was talking about. "Oh, we are finally organizing the guest room properly," she said casually, pouring coffee into her favorite mug with the company logo. "We are going to turn it into a proper filing and storage space." "And where exactly am I going to live?" I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. "Well, dear, you are 22 now. It is time for you to find your own place. You cannot live with your parents forever." The casualness of the statement left me speechless. My mother was talking about kicking me out of the house as if it were a natural and obvious progression, as if I were a tenant whose lease had expired. "Mom, I pay rent here. I am actively looking for a job. It is not like I am just taking advantage of the situation." "I know, dear, but you have to understand our position. The company is growing, and we need the space. Besides, it is better for you too. You need independence." "And Jake?" I asked. "Is he going to keep his room?" "Well, Jake is still in college. It is different." "How is it different?" "He is 19, not 12, and he is living on campus 9 months a year." "Sarah, do not be dramatic. Jake needs a place to come back to during holidays and weekends. You are graduated now. It is time to move on with your life. So Jake, who barely uses his room, keeps an untouched shrine. But I, who live here and pay rent, need to leave because you need storage space?" "It is not quite like that," she said, but her voice had acquired that defensive tone I recognized from childhood. "You understand our situation. I understand the situation perfectly. I understand that Jake's room is sacred and untouchable, and my space is dispensable when you need convenience." That night, I went up to Jake's room while he was at university. I opened the door and looked at the space that had been preserved like a museum of his childhood. The shelves still had the same action figures from when he was 12, organized by franchise and size. The desk still had the same board games he collected, never played, but perfectly organized. The walls still had game posters he had put up when he was in middle school, some already fading, but still considered too important to remove. The gaming setup took up half the room, with equipment that cost thousands of dollars and that he used maybe twice a month when he came home. There were 2 gaming chairs, in case he wanted to play with friends. There was a mini fridge that my mother kept stocked with his favorite drinks. There were even clothes in the closet that had not fit him for years, but that my mother refused to donate because they were special memories. This room was bigger than the guest room where I lived. It had better lighting, more storage space, and a much more pleasant view, but it was untouchable because it belonged to Jake, even though he was absent 90% of the time. I looked at my own reflection in the black screen of one of his monitors and realized I was crying. Not because I wanted Jake's room, but because the difference in treatment was so obvious and painful that I could no longer pretend I did not see it. Jake was the son who deserved a preserved space, a shrine maintained exactly as he liked it, regardless of how much time he spent away. I was the daughter who needed to find somewhere else to live because my parents needed storage space. Jake was permanent. I was temporary. The next morning, I confronted my parents during breakfast. They were sitting at the kitchen table, my father reading news on his tablet while my mother answered emails on her phone. "I need to talk to you about the room situation," I said, pouring coffee for myself. "Of course, dear," said my father, David, without looking up from his tablet. "About the moving timeline? We can be flexible with dates. It is not about timeline. It is about principles." My mother looked up from her phone. "What principles?" "The principles of treating your children equally. The principles of not kicking a daughter out of the house to create storage space while maintaining an untouched shrine for the son who barely uses his room." "Sarah, do not be dramatic," said my mother. "We are not kicking you out. We are encouraging you to become independent. Jake is 19, and you are not encouraging him to become independent. He has a room he uses 8 weekends a year, but it is considered essential. I live here, pay rent, and my space is dispensable. Jake is still studying, said my father. It is different. I just graduated 7 months ago. If being a student is the criteria, then I should have had more rights to space during my 4 years of college, not less. You did not live here during college, said my mother. You lived on campus, and Jake does not live here during college. He lives on campus too. What is the difference? The difference is that Jake always considered this his primary home, said my father. You chose to live away when you went to college. I went to the college you wanted me to attend. Boston University was your choice because you wanted me to study close to home but have a campus experience. And now you are using that against me? We are not using anything against you, said my mother. We are simply being practical about our space needs. Your practical space needs include maintaining a museum room for Jake, but do not include space for the daughter who actually lives here. Jake needs his space when he comes home, said my father. He gets uncomfortable when things change. And I do not get uncomfortable being treated like a temporary tenant in the house where I grew up. Sarah, you are being unfair, said my mother. We welcomed you back after college. We gave you time to get established. You gave me the worst room in the house, charged me rent, and now you are kicking me out to create storage space. How is that welcoming? You are not being kicked out. You are being encouraged to grow. Jake is not being encouraged to grow. Jake is being protected from any change or discomfort. Jake is different, said my father, finally putting his tablet aside. He has always been more sensitive to changes. More sensitive to changes, or more spoiled? I asked. Because from my perspective, you are protecting Jake from any inconvenience while treating me like a problem to be solved. That is not true, said my mother, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Is it not? Then explain why Jake, who uses his room 8 weekends a year, maintains an untouched space, while I, who live here and pay rent, am told I need to leave because you need storage. My parents looked at each other, that look I recognized from childhood when they communicated silently about how to handle me. Sarah, said my father carefully, you have always been more independent than Jake. Since you were little, you adapted better to changes. So because I adapt better, I deserve worse treatment? It is not worse treatment. It is recognition of your strengths. My strengths qualify me to be kicked out of the house, but Jake's weaknesses qualify him for a permanent shrine. You are not being kicked out, said my mother again. You are being prepared for adult life. And Jake does not need to be prepared for adult life? Jake has more time, said my father. He still has 2 years of college. And after those 2 years? I asked. Are you going to convert his room into storage space too? My parents were silent for a moment too long. Well, I insisted. When Jake graduates, are you going to treat him the same way you are treating me now? We will see when the time comes, said my mother evasively. You will see when the time comes. But with me, the time came at 22, 7 months after graduation. Sarah, you are making this more complicated than it needs to be, said my father. We are simply making practical adjustments for our current needs. Practical adjustments that only affect me, not Jake. Jake is not here most of the time, said my mother. It does not make sense to mess with his room. I am here most of the time. And it makes sense to mess with my space? You do not have your own space here, said my mother. You are using the guest room. Why do I not have my own space? Because you converted my room into an office the moment I left for college. Jake went to college and kept his room untouched. Those were different circumstances, said my father. Your mother's business was growing when you went to college. Mom's business was growing, so my room was sacrificed. Mom's business continues to grow, so my current space is being sacrificed. What will be the next excuse when Jake graduates? We do not know what will happen when Jake graduates, said my mother. But you know what is happening to me now. And what is happening is that I am being kicked out to make room for storage, while Jake maintains a personal museum that he rarely visits. That afternoon, I called my best friend from college, Jessica, who lives in Cambridge and works for a nonprofit organization. I told her about the conversation with my parents and how I was feeling about the whole situation. That is absolutely insane, Jessica said. Your parents are literally choosing storage over their daughter while maintaining a shrine for your brother who does not even live there. I know it sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but they make it seem so reasonable. Like it is just natural progression that I should move out. Sarah, there is nothing natural about kicking your daughter out to make room for filing cabinets while keeping your son's childhood room as a museum. That is blatant favoritism. But they keep saying Jake is different, that he needs his space more than I do. Jake is different because they treat him differently. They have spoiled him his entire life, and now they are using his inability to handle change as an excuse to continue spoiling him at your expense. Jessica was right, but hearing it confirmed by someone outside the family made the situation feel even more painful. I was not being dramatic or unreasonable. I was being treated unfairly, and my parents were using my adaptability and independence as justification for worse treatment. That evening, I decided to look at apartments in the Boston area, even though my job prospects were still uncertain. I spent hours on rental websites, calculating how much I would need for deposits, first month's rent, and basic furniture. The numbers were overwhelming. Most decent one-bedroom apartments in areas with reasonable commutes to potential jobs cost between $1,800 and $2,500 a month, plus utilities. I had been saving money while living at home, but not nearly enough to cover the upfront costs of renting, plus several months of expenses, while I continued looking for work. The realization hit me that my parents were not just asking me to move out, they were forcing me into a financially precarious situation because they needed storage space. Meanwhile, Jake's room, which cost nothing to maintain as a shrine, was considered essential and untouchable. I went downstairs to find my parents watching television in the living room. They looked up when I entered, and I could see in their expressions that they were hoping I had come to terms with their decision. I have been looking at apartments, I said. Do you realize that you are asking me to spend $2,000 a month on rent while I am still looking for work, so that you can turn my current room into storage? Sarah, we told you we can be flexible with timing, said my mother. You do not have to move out immediately. How flexible? I asked. Because the apartment search is showing me that I need at least $5,000 up front just for deposits and first month's rent, plus money for furniture and several months of expenses while I find work. We can help with some of those costs, said my father. How much help? Because if you are going to help me pay for an apartment, why not just let me continue paying you rent to stay in the guest room? Because we need the space, said my mother. The business is expanding, so I need to go into debt to pay for housing while Jake's unused room remains a shrine. Jake's room is not unused, said my father. He comes home regularly. 8 weekends a year is not regular use. That is occasional visiting. It is still his home, said my mother. This is still my home too. Or it was until you decided storage was more important than housing your daughter. My parents exchanged another one of their looks. Sarah, said my father, we love you, and we want to help you transition to independence. But you have to understand that maintaining Jake's room is different from maintaining space for you. How is it different? Jake has never lived anywhere else as his primary residence. This has always been his main home. I lived here for 18 years before college. How is that not making this my main home? You chose to live on campus during college, said my mother. You established independence. I followed your advice about college. You told me that living on campus would be good for my development, and that I could always come home. Now you are using that against me. We are not using it against you. We are recognizing that you have already successfully lived independently. So my success at living independently means I deserve less support and consideration than Jake, who has never been asked to be independent. You are twisting our words, said my mother. I am trying to understand why my brother's comfort and preferences matter more than my housing situation. It is not about whose comfort matters more, said my father. It is about practical considerations and what makes sense for our family. What makes sense for our family is kicking out the daughter who lives here and pays rent, but preserving a museum for the son who visits occasionally. Sarah, you are being deliberately obtuse, said my mother. You know that Jake needs stability, and I do not need stability. I need to be financially stressed and housing insecure so that Jake can have stability. You are 22 years old. You should be capable of providing your own stability. Jake is 19 years old. Why is he not expected to provide his own stability? Because Jake is still in school and has different needs than you do. Different needs? Or you just care more about meeting his needs than mine? We care about both of your needs, said my father. But we have to make practical decisions about our space. Your practical decisions involve maintaining unused space for Jake and eliminating housing for me. How is that caring about both of our needs equally? My parents did not have a good answer for that question. They fell back on repeating that it was time for me to be independent, and that Jake was different and needed his space. But they could not explain why Jake's needs were more important than mine, or why my independence should come at the cost of financial stress while his comfort was protected at all costs. That night, I lay in the guest room that would soon become a storage closet, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how completely my family's priorities had been revealed. Jake's emotional comfort was worth maintaining an expensive, unused shrine. My housing stability was worth sacrificing for filing cabinets. I thought about all the times growing up when I had been told to be understanding when Jake got upset about changes. All the times I had been asked to accommodate his preferences because he was younger, or more sensitive, or needed extra attention. I had always been the reasonable one, the adaptable one, the one who could handle disappointment and change. And now, at 22, I was learning that being the reasonable one meant that your needs came last, that being adaptable meant that your space could be taken away, that being able to handle disappointment meant that you would be asked to handle more and more disappointment, while others were protected from any inconvenience at all. Jake had learned that being sensitive meant that his preferences would be prioritized, that being unable to handle change meant that everything around him would be kept exactly as he wanted it, that expressing discomfort meant that other people would sacrifice their needs to preserve his comfort. The difference in our treatment had taught us both lessons about what we could expect from the world. Jake had learned that his needs mattered most. I had learned that my needs mattered least. 2 days later, Jake came home for the weekend. I was in the kitchen making coffee when he walked in, carrying a bag of laundry for our mother to wash. "Hey, Sarah," he said casually. "How is the job search going?" "It is going fine," I said. "How is school?" "Good. I heard you might be moving out soon." That is exciting. Exciting was not the word I would have used. Mom and Dad need the guest room for storage, so I am looking for apartments. "That makes sense," he said, opening the refrigerator to see what food was available. "It will be good for you to have your own place." "It will be expensive," I said, "but I guess storage space is more important than affordable housing." Jake looked at me with a confused expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you get to keep your room exactly as it is, even though you use it 8 weekends a year, while I get kicked out to make room for filing cabinets." "Oh," he said, and I could see that he genuinely had not considered the comparison. "Well, I still need my room when I come home. You need your entire room to be preserved exactly as it was when you were 12 for the 8 weekends a year you visit. It is not just about the weekends. It is about having a place that feels like home. This feels like home to me too. Or it did, until I was told I needed to leave to make room for storage." Jake looked uncomfortable. "I am sure Mom and Dad are not just kicking you out. They probably think it is time for you to be independent." "Do you think it is time for you to be independent?" "I am still in school," he said. "It is different. You are 19. I was living independently at 19. You chose to live in dorms. I come home on weekends. You choose to come home on weekends. You could stay on campus and be independent too, but I like coming home. My room is here. My stuff is here. Your stuff has been here untouched for 2 years. When was the last time you actually played with any of those action figures or used any of those board games?" Jake looked toward his room. "It is not about playing with them. It is about them being there. Being there for what? Being there because they are mine. Because this is my space. And the guest room is not my space? The guest room is the guest room," he said. "It is not really anyone's permanent space. It has been my permanent space for 7 months. I pay rent for it. But it is still the guest room, and your room is still your room, even though you do not live here anymore. I do live here. I just also live at school. You live at school 9 months a year. You visit here. Visiting and living are not the same thing," Jake said, but he sounded less certain than before. "Exactly. You visit here, but your room is treated like a shrine. I live here, and my space is being converted to storage." Jake was quiet for a moment. "I never thought about it that way. How did you think about it?" "I did not really think about it at all. I just assumed you would find an apartment and everything would work out. Did you assume that? Or did you not care as long as your room stayed exactly the way you like it?" "That is not fair," he said. I care about you. Do you? Because you have not once asked how I feel about being kicked out of the house. You have not once offered to give up anything to help me stay. You just said it was exciting that I would be moving out. I thought you wanted to move out. Most people our age want their own apartments. Most people our age do not have parents who maintain shrines to their childhood, while kicking out their siblings for storage space. Jake looked genuinely confused. It is not a shrine. It is just my room. Jake, you have action figures from when you were 8 years old displayed on shelves like a museum. You have posters from middle school still on the walls. You have a gaming setup that cost more than most people's cars. And it all sits there unused 90% of the time while I get told I need to leave because my parents need storage space. I use it when I am home. You visit it when you are home. And your visits are considered more important than my actual residence. For the first time, Jake seemed to really understand what I was saying. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I did not realize you felt like you were being kicked out, he said. How else would I feel? My space is being taken away so Mom can store files, while your space remains a perfect preservation of your childhood. I guess I just thought you were ready to move out anyway. Whether I am ready or not, I should not be forced to move out for storage while you get to maintain a museum. Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What do you want me to do about it? I want you to understand that our parents treat us completely differently, and I want you to care that I am being forced out while you are being protected. I do care, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Do you? Because caring would mean acknowledging that this situation is unfair. Caring would mean talking to Mom and Dad about how wrong it is to kick me out for storage space. I cannot tell Mom and Dad what to do with their house. You could tell them that you understand why I am upset. You could support me instead of acting like this is just a normal, exciting development. Jake looked toward the stairs, probably wanting to escape to his perfectly preserved room. I do not want to get in the middle of this. You are already in the middle of it. Your comfort is being prioritized over my housing. That makes you part of the situation whether you want to be or not. I did not ask for my room to be left alone. You did not ask for it, but you expect it. And you have never questioned whether it is fair that your unused space is considered essential while my lived-in space is considered disposable. Jake did not have an answer for that. He mumbled something about needing to do homework and headed upstairs to his shrine, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the painful realization that my brother had never once considered whether the difference in our treatment was fair. He had simply accepted that his preferences mattered more than my needs, because that had always been the dynamic in our family. That Sunday evening, as Jake was packing to go back to school, I knocked on his door. He was carefully placing clean clothes that our mother had washed and folded for him into his duffel bag. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure, he said, not looking up from his packing. Do you really think it is fair that I am being asked to move out so Mom can have storage space while your room stays exactly the same? Jake stopped packing and looked at me. I think Mom and Dad are doing what they think is best for everyone. That is not what I asked. I asked if you think it is fair. I think it is complicated, he said. How is it complicated? Because you are older, and you graduated, and it probably is time for you to have your own place. And you? Is it time for you to give up your childhood shrine and learn to visit home without needing everything to be exactly as you left it? Jake looked around his room at the carefully preserved artifacts of his childhood. That is different. How is it different? Because I still use this stuff when I am here. You use your action figures? No, but I like having them there. You use your middle school posters? They are part of the room. I like the way it looks. You like the way it looks, so it is essential. I need a place to live, but that is disposable. Sarah, I did not make this decision. Mom and Dad did. But you benefit from this decision. And you have never once questioned whether you should benefit from a decision that hurts me. What am I supposed to do? Give up my room? I am not asking you to give up your room. I am asking you to understand that keeping your room as a shrine while I get kicked out for storage is fundamentally unfair. And I am asking you to care about that unfairness. I do care, Jake said again. But he was already zipping up his bag, ready to return to his dorm room where he actually lived. If you cared, you would say something to Mom and Dad about how wrong this is. I do not want to cause problems. My housing situation is already a problem. The question is whether you care more about avoiding conflict or about what happens to your sister. Jake picked up his bag and headed for the door. I hope you find a good apartment, he said. That was his way of ending the conversation without having to take any position on whether my situation was fair. He hoped I would find a good apartment, but he was not willing to question why I was being forced to find one, while his unused space remained untouchable. As I watched him leave for school, returning to his actual home in the dorms while his childhood museum remained perfectly preserved for his occasional visits, I realized that Jake was not just a passive beneficiary of unfair treatment. He was an active participant in maintaining the system that prioritized his comfort over my stability. He could have questioned why his rarely used room was essential while my daily use space was expendable. He could have offered to downsize his preserved collection to make room for me to stay. He could have told our parents that kicking me out for storage while maintaining his shrine was wrong. But he did none of those things, because doing any of them would have meant giving up some of his privileged position in the family hierarchy. And Jake, like our parents, had decided that his comfort was more important than my housing security. The next morning, after Jake had left for school, I had one final conversation with my parents about the timeline for my move and their expectations. "We have been thinking," said my mother over breakfast, "and we can give you until the end of next month to find a place. That should be enough time." "And if I have not found a job by then?" I asked. "You will figure it out," said my father. "You are resourceful. I am resourceful, so I deserve less support. Jake is sensitive, so he deserves a preserved shrine. Sarah, we have been over this," said my mother. "The situations are different. The situations are only different because you make them different. You choose to treat Jake's occasional visits as more important than my daily residence. We are not going to keep having this argument," said my father. "We have made our decision. You have made your decision. But I want you to understand what your decision means. You are choosing storage space over housing your daughter. You are choosing to preserve Jake's childhood museum over supporting my transition to adulthood. You are choosing his comfort over my stability. We are choosing what is best for the family overall," said my mother. "How is kicking me out while maintaining an unused shrine best for the family overall? It encourages you to become independent while allowing Jake to have stability during his college years. It forces me into financial stress while protecting Jake from any inconvenience. That is not our intention," said my father. "Intention does not matter. Impact matters. And the impact is that I am being forced out while Jake is being protected." My parents had no response to that. They had made their decision, and they were not going to change it, regardless of how clearly I explained the unfairness of the situation. As I left for another day of job searching and apartment hunting, I understood that this was not just about room arrangements or storage needs. This was about how my family valued me compared to how they valued Jake. And the message was clear. His comfort mattered more than my stability. His preferences mattered more than my needs. And his emotional well-being mattered more than my housing security. That realization was more painful than being asked to move out, because it meant that the differential treatment I had noticed growing up was not just about age differences or personality differences. It was about fundamental differences in how much my parents believed each of their children deserved. Jake deserved protection from discomfort. I deserved preparation for hardship. Jake deserved to have his preferences honored. I deserved to have my adaptability exploited. Jake deserved a shrine to his childhood. I deserved displacement for storage. And the most painful part was that everyone in my family, including Jake, had accepted this differential treatment as normal and reasonable. No one questioned why the son's unused space was sacred, while the daughter's lived-in space was expendable. No one wondered whether forcing me out while preserving his shrine might be unfair. They had all agreed that this was just the natural order of things, and I was expected to agree too. But I did not agree, and I was finally ready to stop pretending that this treatment was acceptable, even if it meant accepting that my family would never see me as worthy of the same consideration they automatically gave to Jake. The breaking point came exactly 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in October. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when I heard power tools upstairs. I climbed the stairs to find 2 contractors installing floor-to-ceiling shelving units in what had been my temporary home for 7 months. My mother was directing them on shelf placement while my father measured wall space. All of my belongings had been moved to the basement overnight while I was working a late shift at the restaurant job I had finally secured to help pay for apartment deposits. "Sarah, there you are," said my mother without any acknowledgement of how jarring it was to see my living space being dismantled. "We started the renovation early. The contractors had an opening in their schedule. You moved all my stuff without telling me? I asked, watching a worker drill holes in the wall where my bed had been 12 hours earlier. We told you this was happening, she said. We moved everything to the basement so it would not get damaged during construction. You told me it was happening eventually. You did not tell me it was happening today while I was at work. We had to take advantage of the contractor availability, said my father. These guys are booked for months in advance. So you prioritized contractor availability over giving your daughter notice that her living space was being eliminated? You can sleep on the couch until you find an apartment, said my mother. It is only for a few days. A few days turned into 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping on the living room couch, storing my clothes in garbage bags in the basement, and showering in the downstairs bathroom that had no privacy because it was next to the kitchen where my parents had their morning coffee routine. During those 3 weeks, Jake came home twice for weekend visits. Both times, he went straight to his perfectly preserved room, closed the door, and spent hours gaming with friends online while I folded my clothes on the coffee table and tried to maintain some dignity while essentially being homeless in my own family's house. The second weekend he was home, I was lying on the couch at 11 at night, trying to fall asleep with a pillow over my head to block out the sound of his gaming session, when I finally snapped. I marched upstairs and knocked on his door. "What?" he called out. "I need to talk to you. I am in the middle of a game. Jake, open the door." He paused his game and opened the door, looking annoyed. His room was exactly as he had left it 2 weeks earlier. Not a single item had been moved. His bed was made with fresh sheets that our mother had put on for his visit. His gaming setup was running perfectly, filling the room with blue light from multiple screens. "Do you see me sleeping on the couch downstairs?" I asked. "Yeah, I heard about the renovation." "That sucks." "That sucks? That is your response? I am homeless while contractors install shelves for Mom's files, and you think it sucks? What do you want me to say? I want you to acknowledge that this is insane. I want you to recognize that something is seriously wrong with a family that makes one child sleep on the couch while preserving a shrine for another child who does not even live here." "I do live here," Jake said automatically. "No, you do not. You visit here. You live in a dorm room at UMass. But even when you are not here, even when you have not been here for weeks, your space is treated as more important than housing for the daughter who actually lives here. Sarah, I did not ask for this situation. You did not ask for it, but you are fine with it. You are fine with me being displaced so Mom can have storage space while your museum remains untouched. It is not a museum. It is my room. When was the last time you slept in that bed for more than 2 nights in a row?" Jake had to think about it. "I do not know. Maybe summer break? Summer break was 4 months ago. You have slept in that bed maybe 8 nights since July, but it is essential that it remains exactly as it is while I sleep on the couch." Jake looked uncomfortable but not convinced. "You will find an apartment soon. That is not the point. The point is that this family treats your occasional visits as more important than my daily housing needs. I am not responsible for Mom and Dad's decisions, but you benefit from their decisions. And you could speak up about how wrong this is, but you do not, because speaking up might threaten your privileged position." "What privileged position?" "The position where everything in this house revolves around your comfort and preferences, while I get displaced for storage space." "That is not true. Jake, look around your room. Look at all the effort that has been put into preserving this exact environment for your occasional visits. Then think about me sleeping on the couch downstairs because your parents needed storage space. How is that not a privileged position?" Jake glanced around his room as if seeing it for the first time. The action figures carefully arranged on shelves, the posters perfectly aligned on walls, the expensive gaming equipment maintained in pristine condition, the mini refrigerator stocked with his favorite drinks even when he was not coming home for weeks. "I guess I never thought about it that way," he said quietly. "Think about it now. Think about the fact that you have a full bedroom with a private bathroom and custom gaming setup that sits empty most of the time, while your sister sleeps on a couch because storage space was considered more important than her housing." For the first time, Jake looked genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. "What am I supposed to do about it? You could tell Mom and Dad that this is wrong. You could offer to downsize your collection so I could move into your room temporarily. You could acknowledge that displacing me for storage while maintaining your shrine is fundamentally unfair. But then I would not have my space when I come home. You would still have a space. You just might have to share it, or make some compromises. Like every other person in the world who does not have parents willing to maintain a personal museum for them." Jake was quiet for a long time. I could hear his game making notification sounds in the background, his friends probably wondering why he had disappeared mid-session. "I do not want to give up my room," he said finally. And there it was. The honest truth. Jake understood that the situation was unfair, but he did not want to give up any of his privileges to make it more fair. He would rather have me sleep on a couch than compromise any aspect of his perfectly preserved childhood environment. "I know you do not," I said, "but that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of person you have become." "What kind of person?" "The kind of person who thinks his comfort is more important than his sister's basic housing needs. The kind of person who will accept unfair advantages without question, as long as he benefits from them. That is not fair. What is not fair is me sleeping on a couch while you maintain a museum. What is not fair is our parents treating your visits as more important than my residence. What is not fair is you pretending this situation is normal instead of recognizing how wrong it is." Jake went back to his game without responding. I returned to the couch downstairs, but I could not sleep. I lay there thinking about how my 19-year-old brother had just admitted that he understood the situation was unfair, but was unwilling to give up any privileges to help fix it. The next morning, Jake left for school without saying goodbye. He packed his bag with clean clothes that our mother had washed and folded for him, grabbed some snacks for the road, and headed back to his dorm room where he actually lived, leaving behind his perfectly preserved shrine that was considered more essential than housing for his sister. That afternoon, I found an apartment in Somerville that I could barely afford. It was a studio in the basement of a 3-family house, with no natural light, and a shared laundry situation with the upstairs tenants. The rent was $1,600 a month plus utilities, which would consume most of my income from the restaurant job, but it was the cheapest option I could find within commuting distance of Boston, where I was still hoping to find a marketing job. I gave the landlord a deposit that wiped out most of my savings and signed a lease that would start in 1 week. When I told my parents about the apartment that evening, they seemed relieved rather than concerned about the financial strain it would put on me. "That is wonderful, dear," said my mother. "You will love having your own space. It is a basement studio with no windows," I said. "I will barely be able to afford groceries after paying rent." "You will figure it out," said my father, "and it will be good for you to learn to budget and manage expenses." "I am learning to budget and manage expenses because you forced me out to create storage space while maintaining a shrine for Jake." "Sarah, please do not start this again," said my mother. "You found a place. Everything worked out. Everything worked out for you. You got storage space. Jake kept his museum. I got forced into financial stress. You got independence," said my father. "That is valuable. Independence that I cannot afford and did not choose. While Jake gets dependence that he does not deserve and takes for granted." My parents did not want to continue the conversation. They had gotten what they wanted, storage space, and Jake's continued comfort, and my financial struggles were my problem to solve. The day I moved out, only my parents helped me carry my belongings to my car. Jake was at school, but even if he had been home, I doubt he would have helped. Helping me move would have required acknowledging that I was being displaced unfairly, and he had made it clear that he preferred to avoid that acknowledgement. As we loaded garbage bags of clothes and boxes of personal items that had been stored in the basement for months, my mother kept making cheerful comments about how exciting it was for me to have my own place. "You are going to love the freedom," she said, carrying a box of my old textbooks. "No more family rules or schedules to worry about. No more family support or financial assistance either," I said. "But I guess that is part of the independence you think I need." "You will be fine," said my father. "You have always been resourceful." "I am resourceful because I have had to be. Jake is not resourceful because he has never been required to be." When we finished loading my car, my parents hugged me goodbye as if I were going on an exciting adventure, rather than being forced out for storage space. "Call us when you get settled," said my mother. "We want to hear all about your new apartment." "I will call you when I can afford a phone plan that allows for long conversations," I said, which might be a while given my new budget constraints. As I drove away from the house where I had grown up, I looked in my rearview mirror at my childhood home. Through Jake's bedroom window, I could see the blue glow of his gaming setup, maintained perfectly for his next visit, while I headed to a basement studio I could barely afford. That night, in my new apartment that smelled like mildew and had a ceiling so low I had to duck in certain areas, I called my friend Jessica to tell her about the move. "How are you feeling?" she asked, like I just learned exactly how much my family values me, compared to how much they value storage space and Jake's comfort. "I am so sorry, Sarah. This whole situation is insane. The insane part is not just that it happened. The insane part is that they all think it is reasonable. They genuinely believe that forcing me out for storage while maintaining Jake's shrine is a normal family decision, because they have trained themselves to see Jake's needs as more important than yours, and Jake has trained himself to see his comfort as more important than my basic housing." When I asked him to acknowledge how unfair this was, he basically said he understood it was unfair, but did not want to give up any privileges to help fix it. That tells you everything you need to know about the person he has become. It tells me everything I need to know about the person my family raised him to be. They taught him that his preferences matter more than other people's needs, and they taught me that my adaptability means I deserve less support and consideration. Those are terrible lessons for both of you. Jessica was right. My family had taught Jake that he could expect the world to accommodate his preferences without question. They had taught me that being reasonable and adaptable meant accepting less consideration and support. Over the next few months, I struggled financially in ways that would have been completely unnecessary if my parents had simply allowed me to continue paying rent for the guest room instead of converting it to storage. I worked double shifts at the restaurant to cover my expensive rent. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for most meals. I walked instead of taking public transportation to save money. I wore the same 3 outfits to work because I could not afford new clothes. Meanwhile, Jake continued his regular visits home to his perfectly preserved room. My mother posted photos on social media of family dinners when he was home, always making sure to mention how wonderful it was to have everyone together. The photos showed Jake's favorite meals prepared specially for his visits, the house cleaned and organized for his comfort, and my parents beaming with pride at their attentive son. I was not in any of these photos because I was working restaurant shifts to pay for the overpriced studio apartment I had been forced to find when my housing was eliminated for storage space. 3 months after I moved out, I finally got an interview for a marketing coordinator position at a nonprofit in Cambridge. It was exactly the kind of job I had been hoping to find, with reasonable pay and opportunities for advancement. I called my parents to tell them about the interview, hoping they might express some pride or encouragement. "That is nice, dear," said my mother. "I hope it works out for you." "It would be a significant improvement over restaurant work," I said. "The salary would let me afford groceries and maybe even save a little money." "That sounds very practical," said my father. Their response was polite but distant, as if I were updating them on the life of an acquaintance, rather than sharing important news about their daughter's career prospects. Later that week, Jake called them to say he had been invited to join an intramural soccer team at school. Their response was completely different. "That is wonderful, Jake," my mother gushed when she called to tell me about his news. "We are so proud of him for putting himself out there and making new connections." "It is intramural soccer," I said. "I am interviewing for a career-level position, and Jake is joining a casual sports team. Why is his news more exciting than mine?" "Both of your news items are exciting," said my mother, but her tone made it clear that they were not equally exciting to her. I got the job. When I called to tell my parents, they congratulated me and said they were happy for me. When Jake called to tell them he had scored a goal in his first intramural game, they called me to share the exciting news and suggest that we should all celebrate when he came home next weekend. The difference in their responses was so obvious that I finally asked my mother directly about it. "Mom, do you realize that you called me to share Jake's soccer news, but when I got a real job, you just said congratulations and moved on? We are proud of both of you," she said defensively. "You do not act equally proud. You act like Jake's minor achievements are major celebrations, while my actual accomplishments are just normal developments. That is not true," she said, but she could not provide examples of times when my achievements had been celebrated with the same enthusiasm as Jake's minor successes. The pattern continued for months. Jake made the dean's list, and my parents planned a special dinner celebration for his next visit home. I got promoted at my job with a significant salary increase, and my parents said that was nice, and asked if I would finally be able to afford better furniture for my apartment. Jake decided to change his major from business to communications, and my parents spent hours on the phone discussing how proud they were of him for following his passion. I started a side freelance business doing social media marketing for local companies, and my parents asked if that meant I was not satisfied with my regular job. Every achievement Jake made was evidence of his specialness. Every achievement I made was just normal progress that any reasonable adult should be making. The most painful example came 6 months after I moved out. Jake called my parents to tell them he was thinking about studying abroad in Spain for a semester. My parents were immediately excited and supportive. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity," my mother told him. "We should start researching programs and costs." They spent the next week looking into study abroad options, discussing financial aid possibilities, and talking about how much this experience would benefit Jake's personal growth and career prospects. The same week, I called to tell them that I had been accepted into a part-time MBA program that would allow me to continue working while earning an advanced degree. The program was expensive, but I had figured out a way to manage the costs through a combination of employer tuition assistance and student loans. "That sounds like a lot of work," my father said when I told him about the acceptance. "Are you sure you can handle a full-time job and graduate school?" "I am sure. I have been planning this for months and researching the best way to make it work financially. Just make sure you are not taking on too much debt," said my mother. "Graduate school is expensive." Their response to my MBA acceptance was cautious and focused on potential problems. Their response to Jake's idea about studying abroad was enthusiastic and focused on exciting opportunities. Jake's potential semester in Spain was an amazing adventure that they wanted to help make happen. My actual acceptance to graduate school was a risky financial decision that they wanted me to reconsider. I started the MBA program anyway, working full-time during the day and taking classes at night. It was exhausting, but it was also the first time since moving out that I felt like I was building something meaningful for my future instead of just surviving financially. My parents rarely asked about my classes or how the program was going. When they did ask, it was usually in the context of concerns about my stress levels or workload. Meanwhile, Jake's study abroad plans became a regular topic of family conversation. My parents researched Spanish culture, looked into travel opportunities, and started planning a visit to see him while he was overseas. When Jake came home for Thanksgiving that year, almost a year after I had been forced out for storage space, I decided to visit for dinner. I wanted to see how the dynamic had evolved and whether my parents had gained any perspective on how differently they treated their children. The house looked exactly the same, except that the former guest room was now a perfectly organized office space with filing cabinets, storage shelves, and a desk area for my mother's expanding business. Jake's room remained completely unchanged, a shrine to his childhood that was still maintained for his occasional visits. During dinner, the conversation focused entirely on Jake's college experiences, his study abroad plans, and his recent achievements. When I mentioned that I had been nominated for an employee recognition award at work, my parents said that was nice, and immediately returned to discussing Jake's semester schedule. After dinner, I went upstairs to see the storage room that had displaced me. It was impressive how efficiently my mother had organized her business materials in what had been my living space. Every inch was utilized for maximum storage capacity. I stood in the doorway, thinking about all the nights I had slept in this room, all the mornings I had gotten ready for work in this space, all the times I had tried to make it feel like home while being reminded that it was temporary. Now it was permanent storage for my mother's business files. The space that had not been important enough to preserve for me was now essential for document organization. Jake found me standing there. "Weird to see it all changed, right?" he said. "Weird to see it efficiently organized for storage after being told there was not enough space for me to live here," I replied. Jake looked uncomfortable. "How are you liking your apartment?" "It is fine. Expensive, but fine." "How are you liking your perfectly preserved museum?" "Sarah, come on. Do not call it that." "What should I call it? A room that costs our parents money to maintain for someone who visits 8 weekends a year while their daughter was forced out for storage space." "I did not force you out," Jake said. "You accepted me being forced out without question because it did not affect your comfort. That is a type of participation. I was not going to give up my room for you to move into. I was not asking you to give up your room. I was asking you to care that I was being displaced unfairly while your space remained protected." I did care, but his voice lacked conviction. "If you cared, you would have spoken up about how wrong it was." If you cared, you would have acknowledged that this family treats your preferences as more important than my needs." Jake did not have a response to that. He returned to his room, and I heard the familiar sounds of his gaming setup starting up for another session with friends. I left shortly after, understanding that nothing had changed. Jake was still the protected child whose comfort mattered more than anyone else's needs. I was still the expendable child who was expected to adapt to whatever was convenient for everyone else. But something had changed in me. I had stopped expecting different treatment, and I had stopped feeling hurt by the unfairness. Instead, I felt clarity about what my family's priorities were, and where I stood in those priorities. Jake would always be protected from discomfort. I would always be expected to handle hardship. Jake would always have his preferences honored. I would always be asked to accommodate other people's preferences. Jake would always be seen as deserving special consideration. I would always be seen as capable of handling less consideration. Understanding this dynamic clearly was actually liberating. It meant I could stop hoping for equal treatment and focus on building a life that did not depend on my family's support or approval. 6 months later, I graduated from my MBA program with honors while working full-time. My parents attended the graduation ceremony and took photos, but their pride seemed obligatory rather than genuine. The same month, Jake sent a postcard from Spain where he was enjoying his study abroad semester that my parents had helped finance. They called me to read me the postcard and share how proud they were of his independence and cultural exploration. Jake's funded adventure in Spain was evidence of his growth and maturity. My self-funded graduate degree while working full-time was just normal progress that any responsible adult should make. I realized that no achievement I could make would ever be celebrated with the same enthusiasm as Jake's minor accomplishments. No hardship I overcame would ever be seen as impressive as Jake's willingness to try new experiences with full family support. This was not about what I did or did not do. This was about fundamental differences in how my parents valued their children, and those differences were not going to change no matter how much I achieved or how clearly I explained the unfairness. A year after graduating from my MBA program, I got promoted to marketing director at my company with a significant salary increase. I used the extra income to move to a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge with high ceilings, large windows, and a kitchen where I could actually cook real meals. When I invited my parents to see my new apartment, they politely declined, saying they were busy with work and family obligations. When Jake came home from his semester abroad, they threw a welcome home party and invited extended family to hear about his adventures and see photos from his travels. My career success was my own responsibility to achieve and celebrate. Jake's return from a funded adventure was a family milestone that deserved group recognition. The final lesson in how differently my family valued their children came 2 years later when Jake graduated from college. My parents planned a graduation party for him, invited dozens of family friends and relatives, and spent weeks preparing for the celebration. They hired a caterer, rented tables and chairs, and created a photo display showing Jake's progression from childhood through college graduation. The photo display included pictures from every phase of his life, including multiple shots of his perfectly preserved bedroom at various ages. I was invited to the party as a guest, like any other family friend or relative. When people asked about my accomplishments, my parents gave brief, polite responses before redirecting the conversation back to Jake's achievements and future plans. During the party, I overheard my mother talking to a neighbor about how proud she was of Jake for completing college and how excited she was to continue supporting him as he figured out his next steps. The neighbor asked about me, mentioning that she had heard I had gotten an MBA and a promotion. "Oh yes, Sarah is doing well," my mother said dismissively. "She has always been very independent and capable of taking care of herself." The difference in tone was striking. Jake's achievements were sources of pride that deserved celebration and continued support. My achievements were evidence of independence that meant I required less attention and assistance. Jake deserved celebration for meeting basic expectations like graduating college. I deserved acknowledgement for exceeding expectations while supporting myself financially. Jake deserved ongoing support as he figured out his next steps. I deserved to handle my challenges independently because I was capable of taking care of myself. After the party, as I helped clean up while Jake received congratulations and gifts from relatives, I finally understood that this treatment was never going to change. This was not a phase or a misunderstanding. This was how my family had decided to value their children. Jake would always be the child who deserved protection, support, and celebration. I would always be the child who was expected to be independent, resourceful, and understanding of other people's needs. Jake would always have a shrine maintained for his comfort. I would always be expected to create my own spaces and opportunities. Jake would always be the priority when family resources and attention were distributed. I would always be the afterthought who was expected to appreciate whatever consideration was left over. Understanding this clearly was both painful and freeing. Painful because it meant accepting that my family would never see me as worthy of the same investment they automatically gave Jake. Freeing because it meant I could stop hoping for equal treatment and focus entirely on building a life that reflected my own values and priorities. I moved across the country 6 months later for a new job opportunity. My parents said they would miss me, but seemed relieved that I was capable of managing such a big transition independently. When Jake decided to move back home after graduation to figure out his career direction, they welcomed him back to his perfectly preserved room and started talking about how wonderful it was to have him home again. Jake's return home was a comfort and joy for the family. My departure was evidence of my admirable independence. 2 years later, Jake is still living in his childhood room while working part-time and figuring out what he wants to do with his life. My parents support this arrangement and consider it normal for a 24-year-old to need time and space to explore his options. I am living across the country, thriving in my career, and building a life surrounded by people who value my contributions and celebrate my achievements. My parents consider this evidence that their approach to raising me was successful because I turned out independent and capable. They never acknowledged that Jake's continued dependence on his childhood shrine might be evidence that their approach to raising him was less successful. They never recognized that my independence was not because of their parenting, but in spite of their differential treatment. Jake learned that the world should accommodate his preferences. I learned that I needed to create my own accommodations. Jake learned that his comfort was other people's responsibility. I learned that my comfort was my own responsibility. Jake learned that his needs were automatically prioritized. I learned that my needs required advocacy and justification. These were the lessons my family taught us through their actions, even if they never intended to teach them through their words. The room situation was never really about storage space or practical needs. It was about whose comfort mattered, whose preferences were honored, and whose needs were prioritized. My brother still has his childhood setup, because my family decided that his occasional visits were more important than my daily housing. I built my own setup somewhere else, because I finally understood that waiting for equal treatment was a waste of time that could be better spent creating the life I actually wanted. Sometimes the most painful experiences teach the most valuable lessons. Learning that my family valued storage space more than housing me taught me to value myself enough to build a life where I am chosen, celebrated, and supported by people who see my worth clearly. And that turned out to be the most important lesson of all.